Welcome to Women Mastering Midlife, where we dive deep into the rich complexities of womanhood in our middle years. I'm your host, Victoria Bird, a pharmacist, certified women's health coach, and your guide on this transformative journey. Whether you're navigating perimenopause, thriving in menopause, or mastering midlife's many transitions, this is your weekly dose of expert guidance, compassionate support, and a judgment-free space to explore it all. Together, we will rewrite the narrative around this remarkable stage from being something to dread into a beautiful transition. On today's podcast, I am speaking with Debbie Weiss. Debbie, at 50, woke up to the realization that life is too short to be spent prioritizing others over herself. She ditched I can't for maybe I can, shedding her victim mentality and refusing to let struggles define her. Recently widowed, she's more determined than ever to share her message. Her debut memoir, On Second Thought, Maybe I Can, earned praise from Jack Canfield, co-author of the Chicken Soup of the Soul series. And through her memoir and engaging talks, Debbie has courageously bared her soul, reminding others that they're not alone. Life is tough, but she's proof that dreams are worth pursuing. Hi, Debbie. Thank you so much for being here today. I was really looking forward to this conversation and being able to see you and talk with you right now after just finishing your memoir, literally about an hour ago. It's just a pleasure to be able to pick your brain and get some insight into how you're helping change the lives of other women in midlife.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and for listening to my book. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, one of the things we were talking about before I hit record was that in your memoir, you do talk about how you're not an author, you don't have writing training, you didn't feel like you had any real significant life story to tell. But then when you started putting it to pen, it's a way to resonate with women, because I think a lot of us don't have big life-altering stories or life-changing moments that we feel are significant. But when you look back on them, they are stories that you can learn from. So it gives other women like us, that don't feel like they have those big stories to tell, the belief that our stories are important.
Absolutely. I think that's when I finally realized, that's relatable, right? Because luckily, the larger percentage of us haven't had those incredibly traumatic things happen to us. So when I read that, it's so inspiring to me, right? But it's not something I can relate to. And that's when I realized, well, what do I like to read? I want to read about somebody who might be more like me. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm going to give this a go.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful story. So if you haven't listened to it or read it, I highly recommend listening or reading the memoir. But you also have another book on the horizon, and it's a lot about helping women really look at their midlife and say, this isn't the end of your vibrant years. And also, looking and saying, I have dreams and I want to chase them. So I'm excited to talk with you a little bit about that, because I think so many women sit in midlife and we talk about the stereotypical male midlife crisis. You see those as jokes or storylines in movies. And I think women, they have them as well, but we're a little bit more silent about them.
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of us, or at least for me, I didn't even realize that I felt that way. Sometimes we just, especially as women, we're on autopilot, just like you were saying before we hit record. You're running around in the car, carting your kids places. Like that's what we're doing. We're always thinking about everybody else. We don't put ourselves first. And all of a sudden, your life is halfway or more over, and you don't know what happened to it. It's not like we would not do those things for our kids and our families. Of course we would. But I think many of us do it at the expense of losing ourselves. And I don't think that we need to do that.
Yeah. And there's so many of us that have, that caregiver syndrome, I guess is a word for it, that we do just burn ourselves out taking care of all of those around us. And your story, you give a little bit of insight to things that you began saying yes to and things you started doing outside of your comfort zone that really ended up bringing you joy and opened doors for more experiences. So can you tell me a little bit about that in your own life experience?
Well, let me go back a little bit, because for me, it was something about turning 50 that was like really this life altering number. And it doesn't have, for everybody, it could be a different number. It doesn't have to be a number. For me, it was like, wow, 50 hit hard. and really made me kind of look ahead and think to myself, gosh, who knows how many more years I have left? Most likely it's less than I just lived. And I don't want to get to the end of my life and be that person with regret saying, boy, it went by so fast and I didn't get to do everything or anything that I necessarily wanted to. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like, it wasn't like I had some pent up desire to be a writer or an artist, or I don't know. There wasn't anything, but there was something inside of me that just, I guess, was unsatisfied with my life. And I didn't really realize it because I had never slowed down to examine it. It was just, get up in the morning and go through that list, right? And think about everything you have to do that day, the next day, go to sleep, do it again. It's just like that hamster wheel. And once I realized that, I have the ability to change or get off that hamster wheel. Nobody's going to do it for me. It doesn't make a difference of the circumstances in my life. I'm the only one who can make that change. And when I started changing, I did start realizing that I was so closed off to anything new or any other experiences, or thinking that it only had to be this way, that when I kind of broadened my horizons a little bit, I started, slowly branching out, doing things that I never would have said yes to. And one of the stories in my book, and it's so funny that I'm even saying this because it just came up as a memory on my phone, is I took belly dancing lessons. I never had a desire to do belly dancing. Like, it wasn't one of these things. And it just kind of happened. I talked to another woman who was doing it, and I was like, you belly dance? Which was so obnoxious of me to make this preconceived, thought. I'm like, what does a belly dancer look like? I didn't know, but I didn't think it was her. And, I'm asking her all these questions, and she's telling me how great it is. And I thought, well, maybe I can do that. Why not? This woman did it. She doesn't look like a person to me that would be a belly dancer. And it was way out of my comfort zone. And I convinced a friend of mine, really, she was only an acquaintance, but I knew she was someone who'd be up for anything. And we did it together. And I'll tell you, it stretched me in ways I can't even explain. And I found that I really looked forward to it. And it turned out to be something that really, I think, had me grow as a person, because it did make me feel so uncomfortable. They don't call them recitals. I forgot now what they call them, but they don't call them recitals, but we had like recitals and learning routines. And, it was so much fun. And it really showed me that if you're open, how much there is in this world to discover that's out there that you might not even know is for you. And I think that was one of the first things that I did that was really out there for me.
So you're saying your 30-year-old self would have been surprised that you would be in a belly dancing class in your future?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Look, and I did it because I always loved to dance. And as a little girl, at like 5 or 6, dropped out of dance class because of something that a person said to me about the size of my body wouldn't fit into a costume. And I was so mortified at that age that I never went into a dance class again. And if I had to say one thing that, I had a dream of, it would have been to be a dancer. I don't know what kind. I don't know if, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, if there was something in me, it's dance. I do love dancing, but not belly dancing.
Yeah, that one would not be on my list of things that I would imagine myself doing either. So I understand that. And speaking of dreams that you've had in your youth, so you've talked about the dream of dancing, and we brush them aside because of for a lot of women, you might dream of doing something, and then it's, finances, family, or even the voice in your head saying like, you're too old to do this. how do women get out there and do things now like that? I mean, you took this belly dancing class when you were older and you still had all these commitments of time and business and family. So what do you say to women to get them out there to take the classes?
So I would say the first two things that I did that were very difficult for me was one, learning to say no. And learning to say no is a form of self-care. And I never said no. If somebody asked me to volunteer for an organization, they needed me. Of course I said yes. I wouldn't want to disappoint them. And at one point, I'm self-employed. I have an insurance agency. So I'm running my business like you are now, carting my kids around. And I was volunteering for 3 different organizations simultaneously. I mean, it was crazy. And just because I couldn't say no. So I think the first thing was saying no. It's the same thing sometimes to some social stuff that I said yes to, but I really didn't want to go. And I wasn't really prioritizing what I needed. And if you start to look at some of the commitments that you have, you don't need all of those commitments. You think that you have to do it, but you don't have to do it. And that was a big thing for me. Just learning or starting to learn to do that began to free up time. The same thing with creating boundaries. I mean, I felt I had to be there 24/7 for everyone in my family. You know what? They can wait. If I have to say, I can help you with that, but you have to wait until after I come back from my belly dancing class, then that's what it's going to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be on their, time frame. We always think we have to jump in and do what everyone wants and everybody needs that second. When you start to create boundaries, you're also teaching your kids and possibly your husband, no, it doesn't have to be that way. But you're the one who has to set it, because if you don't, it'll just continue, right? We all want what we want when we want it. So it's only human nature.
Yeah, I thought about this last night. I went to a school open house that one of the parents needed to go to. So my husband did all the driving of the dance and things. And I got home and, all the things still had to be done. And I was looking around thinking like, why did this all magically wait for me? But also, my daughter was like, it was so weird you weren't here, Mom. We just didn't know what to do. It felt so weird. And I thought, I'm gone for 2.5 hours. And when you're 18 and going to college, you're going to leave with no hesitation. You're not going to think twice about what it's going to do to your poor mother. So, it really does give you some insight to setting those boundaries and saying no around your time. And also that your family can wait on some things.
And maybe, it was good for your kids because they're going to have to figure out what to do when you're not there.
Yeah.
It's good training. I mean, I see it I have 2 sons, 23 and 21. And my 23-year-old does have some special needs. He was originally diagnosed on the autism spectrum, and then he added ADHD and depression and anxiety and a few other things. And, he is not self-sufficient. He does not have, I was so quick to jump in and do everything for him. Now looking back, that he has not developed the skills that he needs to live as an independent adult. Where my 21-year-old, who's a senior in college, wow, the difference is startling. And I don't remember why this conversation ever ensued, but I asked them, I guess, what would be something that you feel I should have done differently when I was raising you? And my younger son said, you were too nice. And I think he meant you were too nice, almost like you did everything for us. You didn't give us a chance to kind of fail and figure it out on their own. And, nothing much I can do about that now other than change moving forward. But you're doing them a favor, and you don't think of it that way because you want to do everything you can to help them, and really backing off sometimes, especially when they're teenagers, is helping them and helping you too.
And if it frees up time to pursue, dreams and new exciting things, I think that that's also, it's really important to leave that time for ourselves. I don't think women do that enough. I don't think we give ourselves enough time to do things that are just for fun.
I think we feel guilty because there's always something else we could be doing, right? Our to-do list will never be empty. So you might as well carve out some time to do something just for you.
So, in your first book, it was a memoir of your journey at 50, where you chose to live out some of your dreams. And your upcoming book is a guide to help other women. So, would you mind talking a bit about some of the tips that you give women and ways they overcome obstacles to chase their own dreams?
So, my memoir was, as you know, Victoria, it was just a bunch of stories of my life. And the idea is to be inspirational, to say that regardless of what your circumstances, your age, or anything, you always have the power to make a change. In that memoir, I didn't give any tips or tricks or anything like that. And so I felt like people were saying, well, what exactly did you do? Or what have you done to this point? Because it's now I'm going to be 61 in a couple of weeks. So it's more than a decade later. And so my second book, called The Sprinkle Effect, A Guide to Creating a More Colorful and Fulfilling Life, is a 15 or 16 different sprinkles like rainbow sprinkles, colorful sprinkles that you can sprinkle into your life that will literally begin to change your life. And the sprinkles are a sprinkle of perspective, of mindset, of belief, of dreaming, action, resilience, those types of things. And for me, it was really just getting started and changing my perspective of what I needed to be doing on a daily basis, changing my perspective and opening up my mindset to realize that anything is possible. And what do I need to do? What are the steps I need to do in order to start living that dream? And, in the book, I say, because I have learned this firsthand and never really understood it, when you start to go through this journey of figuring out what you really want the rest of your life to look like, it takes work. And I never really understood when people said, oh, you have to work on yourself. I have to be honest, to me, I thought it was a bunch of nonsense. And what I've learned is that I've read and listened to books. And at the time, I'm so inspired. I'm like, yes, I'm going to do that. And I put it down and I forget about it. The times that I have really made progress is when I have done the work, meaning you do, the exercises, the activities, which many of them are self-reflection and writing the answers down. That was one thing I thought, oh, seriously? I have to write the answers down? Let me just think about my answer. But once you start writing, there is something so different that I can't explain until you experience it. And again, I didn't buy into this until I finally said, what's wrong with you? Give it a try. And with so many of these things, I was so resistant. And some things I tried and they weren't for me, and that's okay. But others that I tried literally started me down a path that I'm still on. So I can't stress enough that working on yourself is really the thing. You can read my book and it won't do a thing if you don't do the work yourself. Because the first thing that I ever took was a course, and it was by a woman who had lost a lot of weight, which was something that's been a lifelong issue for me, and also paid off a lot of debt, which also an issue for me. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take her course and she's going to tell me exactly what she did, because she must hold the key, right, to these answers. And I was so annoyed as I was taking the class because she's not telling me these things. And maybe it was halfway in where I realized, no, she's not going to give me the answer, because each of our answers we have to find for ourselves, right? Even with all the diets out there, it doesn't matter. we all know what to do. You know what I mean? There is no one person that holds the key except for you. And the only way that you're going to find your own key is to literally do the work.
Did you hear about the Women Mastering Midlife community but missed the enrollment window? Don't worry, your opportunity is coming again soon. Are you tired of feeling lost in the sea of conflicting menopause advice, struggling with symptoms that your doctor dismisses, wasting money on miracle products that don't deliver? The Women Mastering Midlife community is your solution. We offer expert guidance from a pharmacist and certified women's health coach, a supportive community who truly understands, research-backed resources at your fingertips, personalized strategies for nutrition, fitness, and overall well-being. But here's the catch. Our doors aren't always open. Don't miss your chance to transform your midlife journey. Sign up for our waitlist today at www.missvictoriabird.com/community or join the waitlist through the link in our show notes. Waitlist members will get first access when enrollment reopens, exclusive content until our next launch, and a special membership rate only for those on the waitlist. I'm Victoria Bird, a pharmacist and certified women's health coach who created the community I could have used when I began to experience symptoms of perimenopause. Not only have I spent years researching the menopause transition and working with clients, but I am also right alongside you in the thick of it. This community addresses the whole experience of midlife, and with a sense of belonging only a group of women can provide. Take control of your perimenopause experience. Join the waitlist now at www.missvictoriabird.com/community or find the link to the waitlist in our show notes below. Yeah, when I was listening to toward the end of your book, you talked about that course and also like listening to podcasts, and which led you to the course, which led you to the supplements, and you tried things that didn't necessarily work, but they led you down to your next thing and your next thing. And even though you had a busy life, you had an ailing husband, you still pursued your deadlines. You kept up with deadlines that you needed to make because they were there. And I think a lot of women can attest that we put things aside, like, oh, I'll wait till the kids go off to college before I start a podcast or before I start helping other women, or, I'll wait till I'm retired to do this. And you really talked about in your memoir how that's not the way you pursued things. And so could you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. So the whole thing from podcasts. And so I'm so happy that anyone's listening. Hopefully this is going to set you on your own path of journey and discovery, or at least open your mind to what is possible. That is what got me started. I was like, I didn't even know what a podcast was. I said to my friend, I was like embarrassed. What do you listen to? Who are these people that you're listening to? Like, are they famous? She said, no. Well, then who are they? And then she's like, well, just search on a topic. And so that's how I kind of started. And it really took me down a rabbit hole because, after taking that course where I was like, oh, she's not going to give me the answer. I have to find the answer. I continued. And like you said, I went down a bunch of different paths because I really started like, okay, for me at that point, it was like a money situation and that I needed to get control over. And I was then like, okay, how's another way that I can make money? That kind of led me into this whole other world that I didn't know was out there. And it turned to be, something so much more than money, and money then, kind of took a back seat. But through a podcast, I heard a woman being interviewed who helped first-time authors get their stories out there. And prior to that, there had been a lot of talk in my head I had a coach about this is what I needed to do. I needed to write a book. I never had a desire to write a book. Like you said, I'm not an author. My first career was a CPA for 10 years. I'm a numbers person. Yeah. So I thought, that's all great. But if I'm ever going to write a book, how do you find one of those ghostwriters? Because I'm not writing it. And so when I happened to be listening to this podcast that I don't usually listen to, and that woman was on, I felt like that was a sign. That was the universe telling me, here it is. Here's your answer. Talk to this woman. And that's what I did. I, had a meeting with her and instantly connected. And she was launching a course for first-time authors to help them get their stories out there. And I was considering this course, and simultaneously, my husband was diagnosed with a terminal blood cancer. And I said, well, clearly this is not the time to jump into this. And I was seeing a therapist at the time, and I said, I'm embarrassed to even bring this up, that I'm even considering this. And I tell her, and she said, well, I disagree, because during this time, you're going to need something just for you, separate from everything else that's going on. And I said, yeah, but I don't know what's going to be going on. What happens if I can't make it to the group each week, or they give homework and I can't do the homework, or, I don't wind up writing a book? And she said, who cares? And I thought, yeah, she's right. It's like that A student kind of perfectionist thinking. And I joined the course, and the group was super supportive. It was a nice small group of just like 4 of us. And in the beginning, I had no idea what I was doing. And I really did not believe that I was ever going to be able to do this. And then at a certain point, when I started having some clarity, I really started feeling like I had to make this happen. So my husband had chemo, even though it was just to hopefully prolong his life. And he had a lot of other issues. And during this whole time, I made sure that most days I set aside an hour to write. Whether I got up at 5:30 in the morning before he got up and I wrote first thing, whether he was in the hospital and I brought all my stuff to the hospital, and when he was sleeping or going for a test, I wrote. If he was home and I knew he was like, didn't need me, I would set that boundary. I'm going upstairs for an hour. Unless it's an emergency, don't bother me. And when he died, I was 3 chapters shy of finishing. So I don't think when you hear that story that you can really have an excuse, because believe me, this was not an easy time. And what was so interesting looking back, and I didn't know, it actually really helped me, because it did give me something else. I was learning something brand new, which is scary and hard, but it's also so exciting. And so to be able to have that little piece while my life was falling apart was therapeutic. And in the end, I was supposed to have the book to the editor 2 weeks after he died. And of course, they said, we'll extend the deadline. Don't be ridiculous. And after, the funeral was over and your friends and family go home, if you've ever lost a loved one, that's the worst time. Everyone else, especially with a spouse, because I've lost a parent, it's not the same. Your spouse is your partner and he's your everyday life. And so your everyday life is so incredibly different. And it's so difficult. And I said, no, you know what? I'm going to make that deadline, because doing this helped me during this time. And I need it now too. And it gave me something else to focus on. And I did make the deadline, and everything else that follows with getting a book there's a lot that happens after that first draft. It was fantastic. It was the best thing that ever happened, really. Which sounds so crazy.
It's inspiring that if anybody takes anything away from that, it's that regardless of your circumstances, it is okay to take time for yourself and to do something and set boundaries. And also that something can come of it that produces, a beautiful experience for yourself, even if it's inside of something very difficult.
Exactly. And I never would have thought, it's another thing in a million years that I would be sitting here saying that, I've written a book, now 2 books, and you just don't know until you start this journey what's inside of you and what you're capable of.
And I think one of the things when you talked about the courses and taking the time to learn something and getting outside of your comfort zone, you did make a financial investment in that. even when finances didn't really, you didn't really have the financial space to make that kind of a commitment to yourself financially. So what propelled you to make that choice to financially invest in yourself?
Oh boy, it was when I saw the cost of that first course, my eyes almost popped out of my head. And it was like $1,200 or $1,500 for this 12-week course. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I am taking this course that particular time, that first course, to figure out how to get out of debt. And I should go into more debt. And so originally I said no. When I first saw it, like, the woman, the podcaster, as everybody does, she's talking about it's coming, this course. And I was so ramped up for it. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be great. And then when it's ready and I click on the button and the number popped up on the screen, I was like, no, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And, I think what finally did it, I just kept going back to it. I just kept considering it. And I realized, and I know now, I'm tuning into it more and more, is listening to my gut. And my gut kept bringing me back there for a reason. And I went with it. I thought, what's another $1,200 in debt? But it really was. I did say no at first. My rational brain said, are you out of your mind? But again, it was like this gnawing inside that just kept going back. And now, really being able to tune into that gut, I have so many examples in my head where I didn't listen and I did something that I knew I didn't really want to do, or I didn't do something where I knew I wanted to. You got to really tune in. I think we know the answer. We just don't listen sometimes.
Yes, like your quote from Glinda, the Good Witch from Wizard of Oz. I heard that and I was like, oh, that is what I try to tell women all the time, is that you have to listen to your intuition about so many things. In my practice, I talk about, health wise, you need to listen to your intuition on what healthy really means to you and kind of dispel the images out there of what healthy should look like for us. And that's kind of the same in the sense of, trusting your gut in ways that bring you joy, or ways to expand your career or your income. Because I think at some point in your memoir, you talked about how you heard that multiple streams of income are actually the way to, increase your wealth for long term. And so you kind of started dabbling in different little things. And could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, first I started when I first thought to myself, okay, I have to take control. I was in charge of our finances. And since my husband had depression and anxiety, money would make him anxious. And so for a lot of reasons, I got ourselves in a big money trouble. And anytime I wanted to say to him, stop spending so much money on groceries, because he was a foodie, or, later down the line, I think we need to sell our house, he would go into a depression for weeks and I couldn't handle it. So I kept all to myself. When I finally said, okay, I have to step up and now take responsibility, even if it's something so small. And I actually started, and this is when it wasn't that big, going on, Facebook Marketplace and selling things. And I got so excited if I just made $2, and everyone in my house was laughing at me. But the next thing you know, I had like a whole production line, because in the morning I would leave stuff out by my front door, I'd go to work and I'd have to tell my husband, who was home, okay, at 2:00, put that outside along with the little thing for the money, blah, blah, blah. And I took all the money and I put it in an envelope and saved it. And you know what? I had $150 to pay for all our haircuts or whatever it was. And just knowing that I was actually being proactive, even if it was something small, it kind of made me see how small things can add up. So eventually what I decided to do was that this same podcaster that I listened to, she actually wound up working for a network marketing company selling this supplement, a mental wellness supplement that I really, really loved. And so I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do to get a little side gig. I wind up joining again, through this woman, a mastermind. I didn't even know what that meant. I had no idea what I was signing up for. And I go to this group online. It was on Zoom. It was during COVID. And it was 150 people who I feel were all half my age, who were all embarking on these online careers. Online coaches, that was the bulk of them. And when I listened to them and I got to know some of them, I learned that they were coaching people based on their own personal experience. And me, I'm thinking, no, but don't you have to have some kind of degree or credentials or something? And they said, well, your life experience is your credentials. Don't you want to learn from somebody who's walked in those shoes? And I thought, yeah. And I thought, well, what has my life been about? And it's been about caregiving, because I became a family caregiver at 17 when my father had a massive stroke and survived. And I was his caregiver for the next 30 years. So for over 40 years, I've been a caregiver. That's what my life is. So I can certainly help other caregivers. So I decided initially to start an online business helping caregivers, family caregivers, learn to prioritize their self-care.
And that's so important because women, other care providers, men do it too. When they're putting themselves behind caring for someone else, it gets really easy. It's a very slippery slope to let yourself, your health, your mental well-being all decline. And so having that community, I'm sure, was very helpful for a lot of people. And it was a way that you could be an expert in something and give something back at the same time.
Yeah, it absolutely was. What I wound up finding was that when I started working one-on-one with caregivers, again, the idea was to have them pay attention to themselves. But it was really difficult to get them there because they were so focused on what was going on with their loved one that they really wanted to spend the time just talking about that situation. And what I found was, for me personally, I couldn't handle it because I'm empathetic. I would get off the calls and I'd be thinking about them and worried about them. But I had so much of this in my own life that I realized maybe after a year or so, I don't think this is what I can do. And it was very, very difficult for me to make that decision because I had devoted a lot of time and energy and money into starting this up, and it made me second guess. Am I a failure? Did I then now go and waste yet more money? But I knew that for my own well-being, I couldn't do this anymore. And so I did pivot at that point, but I didn't quit. And I think that is the message, is that some things might not work, but that's okay, because then that led me, actually right around that time is when I started thinking about the book. So it led me to something else.
You've written 2 books now, and you've been a motivational, inspirational speaker on a public setting. You've been on television. So these are all experiences that I'm sure, again, as a CPA or insurance agent, you never saw be part of your future.
No, absolutely not. What's happened to me specifically in the last year and a half or 2 now is just mind-boggling, really.
But you didn't receive any special formal education or training, or, there was nothing significant about your life path or career path that still opened this for you. So when I'm hearing this, I'm inspired by the idea that, if you're willing to put the work in and you're willing to work on yourself and you're willing to take the time and make the investment, there really isn't anything that you couldn't possibly do.
No, I was on the Kelly Clarkson show. It's incredible. How could that possibly have happened? I don't have any connections. I don't have any money. I don't have nothing. And, these circumstances, and for me, really, I think just following the whispers, that's how I think of it. Following the whispers that my gut is telling me, take the course, write the book, all of these things, one thing leads to another. And it changes your life because all of a sudden the world, it's just like you're open to all these possibilities. I'm a regular person. How did I get on the Kelly Clarkson show? It makes no sense. But things happen, but you're the one who has to make it happen. Nobody's going to come ringing your doorbell and saying, I think this is what you need to do. Come with me. You have to make it happen yourself. And like I said, that's why I felt so strongly about writing the book and about being a motivational speaker, is because I want everyone to realize that stop making excuses, because that's what I did for over 50 years. I made excuses. I felt sorry for myself. I looked at other people and said, oh, of course they can do that. They don't have to deal with what I have to deal with. Enough. Because if you stay like that, because that's where I was, nothing's going to change. And you're going to be, I don't want to say miserable, but not satisfied with your life, maybe not wanting to really admit that that's the case. Especially, on paper, I have a nice house and a husband and 2 kids, and, and the dog, like the whole thing, a good career. I should be happy, but I wasn't, and that's only what it looked like on paper, not what was going on behind the scenes. And we all have a behind the scenes that's happening. But don't let that hold you back, because I am literally living proof that you can make anything happen. You just have to do it yourself and believe.
And you can do it at any age.
Exactly.
You don't have to be 20 to set off on some course of adventure.
Nope. I'm 61. It's just beginning.
That's wonderful. Well, on that note, that's a perfect note to actually end. Thank you so much for spending time with me and talking about this. I'm inspired just sitting here and chatting with you. I hope that others who listen to our conversation can take some inspiration from it. And again, I'm excited about your new book coming. I'm sure I'm going to audio book that one. And there's a workbook that comes with that book as well.
Yes, there's a workbook. It's not required. But what I found is, so in this book, there are exercises, activities, and journal prompts that you have to write. And I know if you could see what you can't see that's next to me, I have like stacks of all these different notebooks, right? And every time I read something, I'm like, oh, let me just get a piece of paper. And then if I ever want to look back, I don't know where the heck I wrote anything. So I really like the idea of having, the workbook is a place. It's got a few extra things, but it's a place for you to be able to do all the exercises, do all that work that you need to do on yourself in one place. And you can look back and you know where everything is. So it's not required, but I find it helpful. So I wanted to create it.
That's wonderful. And I think that everyone listening at any age should recognize from this story that you're never too old, you're never too young. And as long as you remember to set boundaries, learn to say no, and really listen to your inner voice, there's an unlimited number of things that we can do.
Absolutely. As Glinda said, you always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself.
Thank you so much for coming on. And I look forward to reading your next book.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining me today. We will be back next week for another episode of Women Mastering Midlife. Until then, find us on Instagram at Women Mastering Midlife or Miss Victoria Bird, and join us in the Women Mastering Midlife community to continue our discussions. You'll find links to what you've heard here today, as well as ways to connect with us in the show notes below. This podcast is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. Please note the hosts, guests, and experts featured on this podcast are not your personal healthcare providers, life coaches, or advisors. The content should not be considered as professional, personalized medical, psychological, or prescriptive advice. This podcast is not a substitute for consulting your physician, therapist, local pharmacist, or relevant professionals to discuss your specific concerns and situation. The topics discussed should not be used as the sole basis to diagnose or treat any medical condition, make significant life changes, or make important decisions regarding your health otherwise. Women Mastering Midlife is not responsible for any undesired outcomes resulting from actions taken based on the information provided in this podcast. The views and opinions expressed are those of the host and guests only and do not represent any of those other individuals or entities. Always consult with qualified professionals before making significant changes to your health, regimen, lifestyle, or medical plans.